Good day, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the space race, an event within the Cold War that changed how humanity viewed space, viewed technology. It expanded our knowledge of rockets. It expanded so many characteristics of tech, some stuff that's used expressly for the exploration of space, some stuff as simple as Velcro. But today we're going to take a look at how the space race came to be, what were some of the major characteristics, as well as some of the major persons involved. The first person we're going to look at is Konstantin Slavovsky. This was a guy, he was a Russian school teacher who came up with the theory of rocket propulsion, the idea that a liquid-fueled rocket could be ignited and that the propulsion could be sent out a small enough diameter that it could produce a tremendous amount of thrust, more than anything that could have been seen before. The actual application of his work came from Robert Goddard. Goddard was an American who, in March 1926, took the theory of Tsokov and made it a real functioning rocket. The first successful rocket launch took place. This rocket really wasn't very big. It was about 4 feet tall, and it achieved a height of a few hundred feet in the air, but it did prove the theory and proof of concept. The transformation of scientific theory to practical fact, as well as, in some regards, military application, came from Sergei Korolev. This man was responsible for being the chief designer of the Soviet rocket program. By this point, the Soviets were in full control of Russia, and they were moving forward. The most important, the penultimate individual responsible for the age of rocketry and the space race was Dr. Wernher von Braun. He was a German rocket scientist. He designed the V-2 rockets. These were the big ones that you could launch seemingly from Paris to hit London. He was a German. He was a member of the Nazi Party. After the war, though, the United States patriated him and made him one of the chief scientists to what would eventually become NASA. Up until the late 1950s, a lot of Americans, and well as a lot of Russians, believed that the United States had a technological superiority to just about anything Russia could do. And that idea was shattered in October of 1957. The Soviets launched the first man-made satellite into geosynchronous orbit. This was game-changing. We had no idea where this had come from. We had no idea how this was moving forward, but we knew we were losing. Now, Sputnik itself really wasn't that impressive. It was more of a symbolic thing than anything else. It was also not very big. The orb part of Sputnik was about as big as a large beach ball. Each of those antennae are about 4 feet long, and it circled the Earth about every hour and a half, and it beeped. It beeped inconsistently. There was no pattern to it. For the Russians, it was just a way that they could see, are we receiving the signal? Yes, no. But Americans, you could turn this on to a ham radio, and you could listen to this thing beeping. And if you didn't know what it was, you would, assume the worst. This is a picture of the rocket that was launched that carried Sputnik into orbit. As you can see, the whole system seems rather jury-rigged, but as we move forward, we see it gets much more complicated and much more successful very quickly. The second Sputnik launch was also a Russian launch. This one took place just a few months later, and it did the thing that for a long time a lot of people thought was completely impossible, and that was to send a living thing into orbit. A lot of people thought that, no living thing could survive, that no living thing could endure zero gravity, let alone the launch. But in November of 1957, the Russians proved that was possible. The creature that was sent up was a dog. It was a little dog named Laika, and this was a purely theoretical test to see if an animal could survive. If a dog could, then certainly humans could. Ultimately, though, the Russians didn't have a way to retrieve Laika, so after about an hour in space, Laika perished. But her death did symbolize quite a bit for what Americans would do, as well as what humans could do. This was bigger than just one animal. About 3 months after the Russians are able to engage in the space race, we join them. We launch the Explorer 1 rocket, and it's bigger than that. That wasn't the rocket, but that was a model for it. The idea of it was very simple. Can we get something into geosynchronous orbit? And the Explorer 1 proved that we could. But this achievement was vastly overshadowed by the fact that April of 1961, only 4 years after launching a satellite, the Russians put a person in orbit. This was just a low geosynchronous orbit. It did not even circle the planet, but it was piloted by a man named Yuri Gagarin. It was in orbit for a little over an hour and 40 minutes, and his return marked a lot of surprise for a lot of people. Some people believed that he would see heaven, and when he came back, they asked him, what did you see above the clouds? Did you see, gods or angels or anything like that? And he responded with, "I see no gods, I see only man." Now, whether this was definitely fueled by his communist upbringing in true communist fashion, religion to one form or another does not exist. There's also a very interesting theory that Gagarin was not the first person that the Soviets tried, that they tried a lot of people, but ultimately Gagarin was the one who was successful. There's some credibility to this conspiracy theory, but we'll move on from there to another day. In early 1961, only a few months into President Kennedy's presidency, he made the claim that the United States will land on the moon and come back within a decade. And this was a pretty big goal. This was a pretty, at the time, also unrealistic goal, but it was a claim, and it was something we kept moving forward with. The transformation of scientific theory to practical fact, as well as, in some regards, military application, came from Sergei Korolev. This man was responsible for being the chief designer of the Soviet rocket program. By this point, the Soviets were in full control of Russia, and they were moving forward. Ship 7. And this was manned by John Glenn. This was the first American who was able to circumnavigate the Earth. And it helped a lot of people see that, there was a great future ahead of what was coming for this. The Apollo missions were the missions that got Americans towards the moon. And unfortunately, they were met almost immediately with disaster. On the very first Apollo mission, the crew, as well as the command module cockpit, were destroyed. A fire broke out, and it killed all of them. The fire destroyed the hatch opening system, so you couldn't even open the door to get these guys out quick enough. So unfortunately, and the Apollo 1 shuttle were destroyed. There's a really nice memorial to these guys and the Apollo mission as a whole in Cape Canaveral. The Russians saw failure as well. The Soyuz 1 was a planned mission to join two space modules together, undock them, then have them return safely to Earth. The problem is that when Soyuz 1 started to return to Earth, it had a catastrophic failure of its landing mechanism. But this achievement was vastly overshadowed by the fact that April of 1961, only 4 years after, the end of the space race came with Apollo 11. This was the mission that landed people on the moon. This was the mission that changed everything. 1969, these three guys went to space. They orbited the moon. Two of them, the two that are seating, actually went there. They were the first two people on the moon. We've been back to space hundreds of times. We've been back to the moon about a dozen times. We did a few more experiments. We took some rocks, some pictures. We played golf on the moon. But by and large, we haven't been back since. And to conclude today, there's been a lot of achievements that we've seen on both sides of the table. Both the United States were able to achieve some amazing firsts, and the Soviet Union was able to achieve some amazing firsts. And collectively, our goals are not goals for one nation. Our goals are goals for all mankind. And that's kind of how it should be perceived. So, I hope we learned something today. I hope you walked away with this with a new understanding of the space race and its kind of larger impact. And I guess I'll see you next time. Bye.